Thanks to the previous panel for a good discussion on international risk management and the framework and other things. I think it's a very relevant topic to a lot of what we're discussing. It's now my pleasure to introduce the Special Assistant to the President and Cybersecurity Coordinator and Deputy Homeland Security Advisor. I think I got to add to your title now. Acting, all right. Got a lot of actings. Introduce Rob Joyce. Rob has a hard job. I know. But one of the things, if you look at his again, an impressive bio in the program. But one of the hard things about this job is that you take a career person who has worked at a three-letter agency where they're used to operating in out of the limelight, and so they thrust them up and shred their cloak of invisibility pretty thoroughly. That's also a hard part of the job. So I very much appreciate how hard that is, and the insights that Rob can offer us, I think, are very profound, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So thank you very much.
So I brought my homage to Chris since he's here. If you don't know, Chris Painter and I share a deep addiction to old school Diet Coke. I'll also note that, as I look around the room, I think about half of you have been in a government meeting with me in the last year, right? There's a lot of formers. There's a bunch of people. I see NSA, DOD, DHS, bunch of White House, Commerce. So a pretty experienced room. This is quite a conference in drawn talent from the folks I know in the room, and I think that probably speaks highly of the rest of you I need to meet. So I will I'll thank the folks for putting on CyberNext here. Certainly the Cyber Threat Alliance for inviting me. Michael and Heather got me here, and Michael mentioned I did step up this last week to the Deputy Homeland Security Advisor to cover down until they get the permanent person in there. But it meant I shed a whole bunch of speaking engagements, and this was one I kept personally, so that I could talk to you all and say thanks to Michael, who has been exceptional in kind of the handoff between the work he did and the work I'm trying to do. I don't think you see a lot of daylight between the ideas we've had and the good work we've got to continue. So I'll start just by setting the scene, and maybe that's a bad place to start at the end of a whole day of conference where you've probably been talking about all this, but hopefully I put it in a little bit different perspective. I think if you look, I had a really interesting list of companies raised to me the other day. Alphabet, Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Microsoft, right? That's 5 companies. According to The Economist, those are now the 5 most valuable listed firms in the world, right? And if you think about that, that's pretty astounding. Their primary product is data and information. They collectively racked up $25 billion in net profit in the first quarter of 2017. That's just phenomenal economic numbers. If you look just at some of the individuals, Amazon captures half of the dollars spent online in America, right? They have really cornered that market. It's just astounding. Google and Facebook accounted for almost all the revenue growth in digital advertising in America last year, right? So they really own the eyes and the headspace of how ads get moved on the internet. So that turns you around to the point that digital data is valuable. How valuable? You think about commodities, diamonds, gold. The most valuable, really commercial product commodity in the world was oil, and you can arguably now make the claim that data is the most valuable commodity we have, and this resource is really at great risk in the current environment. You think about the aspects we have involved in that, and it's just significant. The transition from that valuable economic commodity from the cyber to the physical. The Internet of Things is connecting devices all around us, and attaching them to computers with various sensors throughout the environment. These interfaces to the real world then also bring risk back into the cyber world. The Mirai botnet in the previous year took down a large chunk of the internet because unsecured devices at scale could have a devastating effect. Right? But it's not just those resources. It's not just the risk in the cyber environment, but there's cyber now interacts with real human life. The WannaCry virus endangered hospital systems around the globe, right? That put real lives at risk. Factories around the world today trust valves and processes to computer control. And we will soon entrust our own personal lives to driverless cars, right? Much of the things you do on airplanes, takeoff and landing, even the autopilot in between, those are all computerized. So this transition of we have the fabric of our financial resources embedded in that data. We have the physical to cyber transition around us in the Internet of Things, and the idea that now cyber can risk human life. That's significant. And by any measure you want to take, I think the cybersecurity trends are going in the wrong direction, right? That's the challenge for all of us here in this room. I think both nation states and criminals are outstripping the defenses of industry and government. You look at what we need to do and protect. And we're in this state of low intensity conflict online. And so it's going to take a new approach to recognize that reality. I think some of our allies, not just our enemies, have recognized that, right? And so you're seeing international focus on this, whether it be our partners and allies in the cyber environment and the people who are threats to us. So I would assert, we wouldn't tolerate the wholesale theft of our property on this scale. So why are we tolerating our digital property being stolen like this? I think if you look around cybersecurity, it doesn't matter if you're in the government or in private industry, but cybersecurity is a cost center, right? With the exception of maybe some of the firms represented in this room, right? It is not a place where a company is making a profit. They're making an investment in a risk decision, and there's justifications to the board of how much you're going to spend to protect your assets and protect your capabilities. And justifying enough cybersecurity is always a challenge. So that risk is pretty palpable. We know what at times we want to spend, but can you make the justification to spend it? And that's some of the gap. So really then, turning what are the strategic imperatives that really could address these issues? How do we get to them in a coordinated and executed way? So for us, a lot of that was about the Cybersecurity Executive Order, 13800. That was a series of efforts to tap the best minds we have in the government, and in some cases, the government tapping industry on really hard problems. Federal networks, the security of the defense industrial base, the deterrence aspects, the electric grid and the power sector, the international relationships we need to have. So most of those reports are either in and completely delivered or are completed and in final coordination. The bulk of them are in and done. And we've got some really interesting insights. And so those are the things now that are driving us to think about where we need to go and where we need to be. I'll talk about one little piece we haven't talked a whole lot about yet. And, I get the chance to do a lot of speaking, so I always try to pick a new thing to talk about and to focus on a little bit. But a key aspect of cyber defense is visibility and knowledge of what's happening on the network, right? That's not a surprise. There's a lot of good industry solutions for protecting individual networks. And security at scale really needs the ability to see and act. But that is often constrained to your corporate network, your government entity, whatever segment there is. We'd like to see, I think, some of our UK partners are saying they want to be interventionist, right? They want to be out there and knocking down some of the threats at scale. Well, we know there's a problem with the government having too much visibility to the traffic on a free and open internet. That's something, that free and open internet is something we enthusiastically support. It's been good for our economy. I started off talking about those 5 absolutely astonishing U.S. companies that have just made data the new oil, right? It is the new commodity. And they've been able to do that because of that ability to innovate and work on an open internet. So we're not looking to impact that. But what we've got to see is a way that we can step into that gap and act. So we expect private industry really has to have an active role in pushing some of this malicious activity off the net. And so finding that right balance, that right way to do this. This seems to mean that more information from the government needs to be shared in timely and robust ways to enable that response. I think the Cyber Threat Alliance is thinking big thoughts about that. We have others in that space looking at that problem. So we need the government sharing this data to operate with companies at the speed of the internet. Right? It can't be something where we have the government meeting and think about what we're going to release, and then we push it between a couple agencies and consolidate it at some other place and get it out. We've got to fix this to the point where the data, as we understand it at machine speed, is shared at machine speed, and then is able to deflect and knock down and intervene and protect at that speed. So, one thing we've got to have is that healthy debate. Society needs to decide, how do we inform the risk tolerance of somebody being on that internet, shaping the traffic, and knocking down those threats in a space where often the companies want to be a pipe to deliver the bits in from one end to the bits out in the other. So there's technical challenges in there, there's legal challenges, and I would say there's some social challenges. The tension between that privacy and security needs to be discussed, right? And I think that the solution is to step out of that straight government place that is often hard to discuss. And we see some other nations doing, sometimes in the name of security, but often in the name of repression, right? We're trying to stay away from that model. But figuring out how awareness of that malicious activity followed by intervention can address the problem. There are certainly limits to how much you want the government pushing into that infrastructure. So that's the big question of how do we take the knowledge of the government, the ability and the authorities to be able to do some of this, combined with the innovation that brings you those companies that have driven and shaped the internet. So we need private industry to think about more than moving packets straight across their network, how they can think about finding and knocking down these problems. And there's some great work going on at NIST and with Commerce and others who are participating and thinking about the botnet problem, right? That is the model in this space. I think you'll see some ideas coming out of that, but that is the area where we know there are bad things on the internet. They have no socially redeeming value. There's got to be this social compact where we're going to knock those out. We're going to take them off and we're going to make them ineffective. Speed's a problem. More and more of these attacks are really occurring at machine speed, and effective defenses are going to have to operate at automated man-on-the-loop instead of man-in-the-loop capabilities. We're going to have to delegate some decisions to AI and put the rules in place, and that's going to challenge some cultural paradigms. How do we do this? In the end, it really is about people. Those companies I talked about, it was built on the ideas and innovation of people. Right now, we're short about 300,000 cybersecurity workers in the U.S. alone, and we're not going to cover that with gaps and training. So one of the executive order deliverables is a workforce and capacity deliverable. It's got some innovative ideas coming in that, but so we are going to be putting additional effort in this, and it really is, it's a generational problem as much as it is quick fixes. So starting at the lowest levels of our education system, getting kids enthusiastic and excited about STEM opportunities, that's a national imperative. Getting kids into the pipeline and working these problems will put them on a path to help us have the kind of innovation that have driven those 5 massive, amazing, successful companies for us. They're also going to solve some of these cybersecurity problems. So I think, what we recognize is the people gap is unsustainable on the current trajectory. So we're never going to cover that gap completely. And again, we're going to have to make cybersecurity less manpower intensive. And that takes in industry innovation and focus as well. A lot of the things you're thinking about from your seats in this room, right? So those are the kind of things at the top of my mind. Some of the piece parts of the things I wanted to highlight to get you at least talking at the reception and then the days after. Those are the challenges and a few of the things we're thinking about that need big answers, right? There's not going to be one solution that's going to solve the problem of those trend lines that I started talking about. But we've got to very methodically and investment-wise put our efforts in, both in the public sphere and the private sphere, to clean some of this up. Right. So I'm happy to spend a couple minutes taking questions. Thanks for your time.
Is this on? Okay. You spoke publicly about wanting to reform Social Security numbers and making changes there, and I think said that there's a federal working group that convened quickly to try to reconsider it in light of Equifax. Can you give any update on that?
Yeah. So I'll tell you that one, that's not a new idea. I just had the benefit of the pulpit. It also is one that there are some good ideas and there's some standards already developed in terms of how we do trusted identities on the internet. What we've got to get to is the hard problem of executing and implementing, right? And so I literally had reporters calling me, the next day wanting an interview to know about the steps we were taking to eliminate Social Security numbers. And, it is not something that we're going to see this calendar year done and completed, right? If you think about all the places in government and society where they are interwoven, it's a policy problem, it's a standards problem, it's a technological solution, and it's also a resource investment. But the first step in that is the will to do it. And I think between the motivation of Equifax, the attention of the administration, some great work going on in departments and agencies, and some enthusiastic corporations willing to lean into it, I think we can get there and push this out. Right? I just find it horrific that we use Social Security's numbers as a means of identity, and the idea that by using it, I put it at risk. And every time I want to use it, I am exposing something that can be used back against my personal finances. It's just something we can't tolerate. So I think we've got good momentum and great ideas going on. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Heather West from Mozilla. Earlier this month, you mentioned that you were working on a declassified VEP charter, vulnerabilities equities process. As folks in this room heard earlier, I'm very excited for that. Can you talk a little bit about how you're making decisions about what's appropriately classified versus something that you should open up?
So the decision is, one, us pushing for the exposure of what was previously a classified process. I think we've had a really good public debate recently about the role of some sort of equity discussion. I think we've gotten to a pretty solid understanding with the public that there are real needs on both ends of that spectrum. There are national security needs to make sure very strong capabilities are applied to cybersecurity, and there's national security reasons for having a capability, and there's going to be a tension in it, right? I think Michael did a great blog when he ran the VEP about that tension that does and needs to exist. This doesn't eliminate the tension, but what it does is continues the dialogue and opens up a little more about how that process is done, who's involved. There were misperceptions, right, based on that secrecy about who was involved and how we made the decisions, and I think we're pretty close. We actually met on the VEP yesterday. We have literally one thing left to iron out, and that's in the realm of who discloses from the agencies who discovered a vulnerability, and how do we account for that, and who's the record keeper in that space. It's not a hard problem, but it's an administrative thing. So we've got to get that finalized. We're hoping to meet next week, and then a little bit of lawyer work, and we'll have a policy out.
Great to hear. Thank you.
Hi. Again, I'm not American, but I follow all of this with interest. I'm from Symantec. I appreciate the comments you made about the visibility on the network. And indeed, there is a big tension between certain opinions. This tension is actually very strong between standard defining organizations like IETF, ETSI, and others. My question is, are you hopeful we can find a peace talk between the parties, or how would you see we can resolve that? Because right now the tension is very big.
Yeah, so the tension's big, and I think you heard me talk about ways that we're hoping to find a happy medium. There are entities that know an enormous amount about what's going on in the net, right? We trust them every day, whether it's your Gmail or your Google search, or whether it's your purchase history with Amazon, or whether it's the things that Akamai sees, through its presence supporting the internet, and so those are places that we can understand the threat, and pieces of the threat can be worked very effectively. And so the question is, can we empower those companies to act up on the greater good, and what's it take to make that happen? So that's our approach to thinking about how to dial out some of the tension, because it's very clear. I grew up at NSA. I know the capabilities NSA can bring, but I also know that that's not an acceptable answer, that NSA is in that loop doing that packet filtering. So how do we get technically competent, capable people? They're the people that are touching that material anyway. Can we get them to act on our behalf to help clean up the network for the known bads? We think that's one piece of the solution going forward. All right. 2 more questions, please.
Hey, Rob. Chris Bing, Scoop News Group. Earlier today, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but obviously Kaspersky has been in the middle of a controversy. The company came out with a blog post outlining an investigation that they say they did. And essentially the conclusion of that investigation was that they found these files on an NSA operator's computer in the US. Well, first, are you familiar with this blog post I'm talking about? And then second, I just want to get your general response to that.
So I saw the blog post. I'm not going to go deep into it, but I find it surprising that the blog post said that they found this, they took it to Eugene, and he made a decision. But just a couple weeks ago, he said he had never heard of it, right? So a lot of that blog post strains credulity for me.
And then just one other. Recently, obviously, we had the Equifax breach. What is the administration's continued effort as it pertains to a national data breach disclosure law? I know after the breach, you were very supportive of this idea, but I was wondering what the work has been like up till now.
Yeah, so work continues. There's a couple different streams in Congress who are proposing competing concepts. The details matter, so we're just working with them to figure out where the appropriate piece is, trying to balance the corporate equities for reputational and operational risk from too fast a disclosure versus the really important need for us as the victims inside those data sets to know. It's still a high priority on the Hill. It's a high priority for the administration. Thanks. All right, who gets the last question? Eric.
Hi, Eric Geller from Politico. Recently, the Deputy Attorney General gave a speech about encryption at the U.S. Naval Academy, and he seemed to signal, in fact, he said explicitly that the approach that the Obama administration took of expecting tech companies to voluntarily comply with what the government wants to see in this area is unlikely to work. That was the way that he described it. Is the administration breaking from that approach? Are you working on a legislative solution or a recommendation for a legislative solution, or was he maybe getting a little bit ahead of things?
He's talking about the current state of the discussions. And so there's a policy-making group. The policy is not finalized, but we are running policy-making on the need for access to information, right? And I think, you heard Tom Bossert talk about it yesterday. I think what Tom and I are pushing for is continued support by companies to do responsible support to lawful intercept and the need for judicial access to information. And by what I mean by that is if you are building a major platform, you know that the FBI is going to find criminal activity. We're hoping that from the beginning they consider that there is going to be a warrant served at some point and find out how they can work to help support that warrant. I don't think that the government mandating how that support happens is a really wise thing, but I do think that we're looking for companies to help step up and understand that there are things for the the security of the nation, certainly the CT arena, heinous major crimes and other things, that they've got to be involved in a part of the solution. And so we're really hoping to have them involved rather than make this confrontational and directive. All right. Thank you very much. All right.
Rob, thanks again for taking time out of your busy schedule. We really appreciate it, and thanks for your public service as well.